What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassidy. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In-N-Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares and set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. All right, welcome back, Nightmare Success In-N-Out listeners. This is where you come for what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality. How do you adapt, survive, overcome, set yourself free? Wow, do I have a very fascinating, interesting guest today. I've been deep into his story. We had a long conversation on the phone the other day, and this is one of those stories that, to summarize it really quickly, and some of you might have heard about this story back in the 90s, but it was 6 teenagers in the backyard, and there was a fight, and fight was pretty brutal, and some brothers and some friends and a guy that sold marijuana, and someone died, and it was Jimmy Ferris, and he was the son of a police officer. And the story got so much press with these teenage boys. It was out in California in a smaller towns, a suburb town, and they hadn't had a lot of this. And it was one of those stories that really, I think, picked up a lot of steam for a lot of reasons. But the three of the teenagers got charged with felony murder with life without parole. And I've got Jason Holland with me today, who he's with me today. So obviously he's not life without parole. He served 28 years. And when I talk about the people that picked up on this, I mean, there was a documentary done on this. It was called Reckless Indifference. Actor Charles Grodin did a play and directed that play called The Prosecution of Brandon Hine. Alan Dershowitz was a guy that was very much a part of having an opinion on this. One of his quotes was that the prosecutors terrorized the jury into believing the defendants were gang members, and it kind of tainted the whole feel of how this was played out in the courtroom. The Rolling Stone magazine, Lynching in Malibu, Teens on Trial. Wow, it's just it's an in-depth story about all of this and all the different things that happened, but it caught the attention of a lot of people. And I've had the pleasure of Travis Ritchie connected me to Jason Holland. Travis was on this show, and he's done some great things with his life since he got out of prison. And I can't wait to jump on to this Jason Holland story, because he's doing great things with his life now. But first, I want to recognize show sponsor, Auto Plaza Direct. You know, who likes spending a couple of weekends walking car lots, looking for a car? Then you spend 4 or 5 hours in the dealership to buy a car. It's kind of like a root canal appointment. Well, there's a better way to take care of all that pain and hassle getting a car. It's called Auto Plaza Direct. They're your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you. They'll negotiate your best price. They also offer you warranties and financing. It's all full service. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge, the new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. Jason Holland, welcome in.
Thanks for having
making time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So, yeah, I mean, this story, you know, after we got off the phone, I started looking at all the different things that went on with this. This is, 95, I think, is when you were in trial in 96. And then, 28 years later, you've been out since 2023. And I've been following, I looked at your Instagram and social media. You have also taken a bucket list things once you've gotten out. I'm sure there were things that you thought of while you were in that
Sure.
I'm going to do this. And you're jumping out of planes and you're diving in the oceans, and really cool. But Jason, take us back before the event. What What was going on in your life growing up? Take us back to that.
Um, so that's a pretty heavy question, right? I think that what's important is when I look back on it now, I'm looking at it from a much different lens than how I was experiencing it as a youth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I grew up in ultimately a really good household. You know, I had two parents and at home. While my mom did get divorced from my biological father at 5, my stepfather married my mother at 8, and moved us out to California. Um, there were complications and challenges within the family unit. You know, there was violence, there was some drug use and things like that. Um, and it's hard for me to really paint a picture that I had a terrible childhood because I didn't. I had some experiences that were good, some experiences that were negative, but I had a great childhood in terms of like I grew up in Southern California. I played sports. I had opportunities and access to a lot of things that many people don't.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, at the time of 1995, what I was going through was in 93, my mom sent my brother and I away
To
to a
Missouri,
boarding school in Missouri. We
which
were
is
there
where
for a
I'm at.
year. That was a very difficult experience for me at the time.
Yeah. Because
Um,
you were 13 years old then?
I was 15. My
15.
brother was 12.
So you were
Came back
taken
when I
out of
was 16.
school and into the Midwest.
Yeah, and so we went through our experiences in that school, that boarding school, and when I came back,
How long were you there?
I was there for a year.
A year.
Yeah. So when I came back, I tried to reintegrate with my friends here, and things had changed for me. Things had changed in my town, and one of the ways that I dealt with it, like the social and academic pressures that I was facing at the time, was I just started smoking weed, and I was telling myself that it was fun, but really what it became was numbing and escape. And
Pure escape.
the truth is I just didn't want to deal with the pressures that I deemed other people to be placing upon me. And so it was easier for me to just go get high, find friends that like to get high. And at the time, I gravitated to a group of friends who were not only into getting high, but they were into crime as well.
Mm.
And so through exposure with them and through encouraging them to do bad things and them encouraging me, like it just progressed. And so my behavior became progressively worse and reckless. And so within a matter of 2 years, I was experimenting with a lot of drugs. I was drinking frequently. School was not really a real issue in my life because I was just truant all the time.
But it said when I was reading about
Yeah.
you, Jason, that you were smart. I mean, you didn't have to try very hard, and you were a B student. And even though you weren't going to school that much, you were getting by with school. So it wasn't like you were a bad student as far as not getting what was there. It's just that somehow you weren't plugged in. And I was curious about that time period that you were in that boarding school. I think about that, and I think that that's got to be so weird for a California kid to come into a I think it was a Baptist boarding school type
Hmm.
situation. What was that like for you to go from that to that?
It was difficult. It was very much to me like a prison at the time,
Yeah,
very confusing because
you
in
were
that
there with your
school,
brother.
I was there with my brother. They had a lot of like strange rules. So for probably 3 months of the time that I was there, I wasn't even allowed to talk to my brother, even though I
Mm.
would see him. They had these rules about stuff like that. And like they had the kids placed in tiers, I guess you could say, in terms of privileges, who they could and could not interact with, what they could and could not do. So it was a somewhat oppressive environment. It was very much they force fed us religion, um, and so
Do you think
it
that had
was.
an effect on you going back to
Oh yeah,
California? Yeah,
absolutely. And it,
yeah.
and it not only had an effect on me then, but I realized many years later it just had an effect on me spiritually and my relationship with how I perceive God
Hmm.
or just religion or any kind of spiritual walk in my life. I didn't realize it at the time. I just became a really defiant, belligerent teenager when I got home, especially when I was given access and freedom and I wasn't sort of being kept under thumb by the staff that was at that school. So
Mhm.
it was a difficult time, challenging time for me to say the least. And so when I came back, and it's actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because being that my mom sent me there at the time, the way that I told myself that story was that she had betrayed me, and that gave me the excuse and the license to just
Do
basically
whatever.
do whatever I wanted, right? And so and I harbored this resentment towards her, and I harbored it because it allowed me to the permission to do whatever I wanted to do.
Mhm.
I didn't realize this at the time. This came to me many years later. But so when I came back, um, I was running reckless and wild. My behavior was progressively getting worse, and it was getting to the point to where, like, I was willing to use violence on people to get what I wanted. And so on the May 22nd, 1995, that's exactly what I did, and it was extreme violence. And Jimmy Ferris lost his life.
Well,
Um,
and
his best friend Michael McLaurin was critically wounded. Their families were traumatized. The community was traumatized, and we went to prison.
yeah, there's a lot in that because
Hmm.
the struggle that I read about. I mean, whether you say it or not, your brother was just getting absolutely pummeled. As an older brother, you were, I think, the adrenaline and the protection of trying to pull him off, and the whole craziness of you guys being high, been drinking that day, and the other guys, the whole thing sounds like a bad movie, and the situation of how it developed was fast. It sounded, I mean, when I read about it, it's just like you
Yeah,
weren't even sure that Jason, you looked at the pocket knife and you weren't even sure, but then you knew that you had stabbed Mike, and then when Jimmy came around and you'd been kicked in the head, you stabbed just as an adrenaline. So the rush of what I understand is when you guys ran out of there and you're sitting on the curb, you're like, man, I think I stabbed those guys with my pocket knife out of this whole thing. And I know that the craziness of the you would never under an overlook. Um, Somebody lost their life, and it's a horrible situation, and you've and three other guys went through a hellacious experience. But man, that sounds like it was a nightmare that happened in that moment. And you and I have talked. You said you wish you could take away everything that happened.
sure, absolutely, absolutely. And I want to be really clear, Brent. Like, um, looking back on it now, I knew what I did. I knew the gravity of
Mhm.
my actions, and I used my brother was involved, and I used that as sort of a way to minimize my actions later and to justify like why I would have done such a thing, especially once we were under trial.
Mhm.
But I definitely don't want to try to avoid responsibility or minimize my actions today.
Yeah.
There was nothing that Mike McLaurin or Jimmy Ferris ever did for me to take things to that extreme. I had no business being on their property or
Yeah.
doing what I was doing or living the
Yeah.
lifestyle that I was living. One of the things that I realized is I was living my life in a way at that time where sooner or later someone was going to get hurt or I was going to.
Well, and I
And
think,
on that day, it happened to be them.
and the other thing that I think that was such a heavy burden for you at that time is that you did it, and the other
Yeah,
guys, because of this felony murder law, that they didn't kill somebody and they didn't
that's
charge
true.
manslaughter. They charged murder. They didn't. It wasn't self-defense. It wasn't manslaughter. They charged murder, but they charged felony murder. So these
Yeah.
other people, even though they didn't do it, they were charged as felony murder, and they got the life sentence. And I think I can't imagine that feeling of having to deal with the fact that I'm the one that did this. I can't believe that my brother and the friend and whatever is being charged with the exact same thing. And it would have been a lot to deal with. I mean, I would, I read through all your stuff, I was like, man, that's just the heaviness of that and I was wondering when you were going through that, you know, I know that there was, I don't know how many days it went by that your mom made a plea and out to the TV and then you turned yourself in. She took you to the sheriff.
Mhm.
So she was able to do that. And then there was that moment where you said, I love you. And she said, I love you too, babe. I mean, it's also gripping. It's like, what, as a kid at that time, what in the world was going through your mind?
At that point in time, okay, so once I realized the gravity of my actions and the extent of it, that Jimmy Ferris had lost his life, I just was thinking, I can't fix this. I can't take this back. This isn't something that you can just return to someone as if you stole something, right? This was
Right.
a final action. So I was really overwhelmed and almost just seemed surreal. Like I couldn't believe that this was the situation. And then I went on the run. And during that time, I had heard that they were charging my co-defendants with murder.
Hmm.
And it's very much true that they didn't even know that a stabbing had occurred.
Right.
And I couldn't stay on the run and let that be. My conscience wouldn't let me do that. So my hope was that I could turn myself in, I could accept responsibility for my actions, and that my co-defendants would go
Be
free.
let go.
We didn't know about the felony murder rule at the time. That was something that we had never
I
heard
actually
of.
didn't either
Yeah.
until there's been laws or bills that have been. I'm not sure. I didn't go deep enough into it that if they changed that, but there's been looked like looking through that there were several people that tried to change that law.
Well, they've definitely made some adjustments to it now. But yeah, at the time, it was very broad.
Hmm.
And so they prosecuted us pretty aggressively,
Hmm.
rightfully so. And we all ended up with life sentences at the time. The four of us did.
Well, I want to go into that stepping into this whole trial thing and everything surrounded. But before I do, I want to recognize a new show sponsor that we've got. It's Drew Chapin, who's actually been on this show. But you know, many of individuals think that there's no hope when it comes to managing your reputation online. Well, there is hope. Online registration solutions can help you, whether you're trying to build a reputation from scratch, repairing your search results after a negative news story, or even just trying to position yourself a little better against other businesses' competition. Online reputation solutions can also help you as you're portrayed on popular AI searches and services like Chat GPT. To learn more, visit onlinereputation.solutions. They're launching a do-it-yourself SEO option, a course for individuals who can take on their search results and with their own budget and speed. Um, Listeners of Nightmare Success can take $100 off the DIY SEO source or course, and a coupon code is Nightmare Success. So check it out. Drew Chapin's a friend of mine. I love it when we have a new show sponsor that kind of parallels what we do in the show. So, and for those out there, Nightmare Success is sponsored by the White Collar Support Group. It's the world's first support group devoted to people navigating the white collar criminal justice journey. I'm a member of the White Collar Support Group, and I can tell you there's a bunch of people who help each other through the criminal justice journey for free. Whether you're just starting your journey or you've made it through to the other side, this is a great space for you. You can join us on Zoom, 7 p.m. Eastern. For information, go to prisonist.org. Start here. And we've got a white collar conference that's coming up October 19th. And you can go to the whitecollarconference.com to register. So, Jason, on when you walk in, turn yourself in.
Mhm.
Um, I'm sure walking in there and knowing what was in front of you, how long did it take for that whole process to happen?
You mean just initially getting booked?
No, just you walk in there. It's May what? You it was May 20.
Um, so I believe at that point it was June 9th or June 10th on the day that
Okay,
I turned myself
after
in.
you turned yourself in.
Yeah.
So you walk in, you don't know anything about what's going to happen next. Do you get an attorney? How does it all unravel?
Yeah, so that's true. I really had no idea of what I was walking into. But eventually, I did get an attorney. My mom found an attorney for me within a matter of, I would say, a month. maybe, because I initially had a public defender, but then there was someone that she hired within 30 days, and we began the court process. And a lot of it's really murky as I look back on it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I
That was a
have
long
these
time
moments that
ago.
stand out. Yeah, it's been quite some time, and I have some moments that stand out. But yeah, it was. I think it was pretty much a typical court experience. I was lucky enough to have an attorney, and uh, we were
What were the
tried
moments that
together.
stood out to you? Like
What
the
was that?
what were the moments that stood out to you now looking back on it?
Oh, I think like key moments in the court, like key decisions that were made where they decided to try us all together, or there was a moment where the judge allowed the prosecution to introduce a crime spree theory,
Mm-hmm.
and it was the crime spree theory that really enabled them to anchor us to felony murder.
Mm-hmm.
Because up until that point, there wasn't a whole lot of evidence to support that.
Yeah.
But with crime spree theory, all they had to do was essentially say that we had done these three things throughout the day that established identity and intent. And once they were able to put that together, and that was probably one of the biggest controversial decisions of the trial, the fact that the judge allowed that, because that was really the thing that put it all together.
Well, and I think there was an interesting thing about the judge, and I'm only speaking from my behalf, not on you.
Mm.
Um, that this judge was someone who had some high profile, Robert Downey Jr., Gary Busey, and there were some high profile things that happened, and he let him off on probation. I think from reading, I also think he was looking for a case to come down and show that he was tough on crime. And this happened to be at that moment in time of the place was on fire, people are upset, and it appeared that this judge, who had been someone who was seen as lenient before, looked at this case and really came down hard. And I'm not saying that you're saying that. I'm saying that that's what I'm reading from how people, it appeared that he just didn't like these kids and he was going to do whatever the hardest that he could do to show and make a point. But being what it was, you ended up getting life without parole.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wonder, not too many people, I mean, we see it in movies, but when somebody tells you life without parole, how do you, how do you eat that elephant? What goes through your mind when somebody says you're done here, you're going to go to prison forever and not get parole?
Yeah, so I don't have a good answer for that. I think I checked out.
Yeah.
And just sort of, the lawyers at the time were telling us that, well, hey, you have a hope for appeal. The prospects for an appeal look good. And I hung on to that, right?
So
Going
you
in
had some
to
hope on that.
prison. Yeah, and also there were some more pressing concerns for me now. Like I was not a big guy. I was a younger guy, and I
You're
knew
only
I was out of
19
my
years
depth,
old. I
and
mean,
I was getting now ushered off into level 4 prison in California, and I knew that it was going to potentially be pretty dangerous. And so that was really, at that point, I was just more like survive
yeah,
this
how am I going to
rather
survive?
than worry so much about my time. It was
Yeah.
just like let's go, because there's no avoiding it. It just felt like this. Look, it's one of those things, like you got a reckoning coming. This sword's dangling over you, and you're gonna have to face it. There's no wiggling. There's no maneuvering. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where I was at. Like,
Well, and I have a lot of conversations with people because I do this show, and a lot of people will ask me, as they're going into prison, nothing like what you are experiencing with level 4 prison, just the unknown of prison.
yeah,
And what I say is that nothing is ever as bad as your mind makes it out to be. The unknown is the worst thing that you can do to yourself. And I think once even as bad as it can be, the worst information they can give you, at least you can start stepping off of that, stepping into it and dealing with it. But I still think that would be different if I knew I was going to a level 4 prison, because that's the very most violent place to be. And at 19 years old, you and I were talking about this before you got on. I mean, you more or less grew up in prison at 19 years old. You're a teenager, and for the next 28 years of your life, you were gonna, as far as you're gonna spend the rest of your life there. But
hmm.
you 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 grew up in prison, which is fascinating, really. because you have to
Yeah.
figure out so many things, Jason.
Yeah, I did. I grew up, I matured in there. I learned a lot. I went down some dark paths and eventually I found the light. Um, yeah, so
Well,
and it's
let's
a
talk about that because you were talking about that. You know, when you went in, you were so much different than what you became while you were in. But
hmm.
walk us into that moment of you going into that, and those times and years that you were there, and you were and walk us into how you found a different way, because when you walked in, you were in a dark space.
So when you say walk into how I found a different way, do you mean like the moment when I really started to change my life?
Well, when you walked into prison,
Hmm.
how did you survive? How did you live before you transformed yourself?
Yeah, so I think that when I walked into prison, there was a lot of, California prison was different at that time, and there were a lot of different like narratives and things, and I just knew that I had to survive, and I'm gonna be straight. Like I knew I was out of my depth. I was never a tough guy. I was never a tough kid. I tried to project that and
Sure.
convince other people of that, but
Yeah.
I knew like I just didn't belong. But one thing, I remember having this conversation with these guys, these older guys, and they said, "Hey, so what are you gonna do?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And they said, "Well, you're doing life without. You're never going home. What are you gonna do?"
Mhm.
And I was like, "I don't know. What should I do?" And one of them told me, he said, "Look, if I were you, I'd make a name for myself." And what they meant was, get involved with all the stuff that convicts at the time get involved with and make a name. Because really, at the time, I think for those guys, it seemed very true that that's what we had left,
Yeah.
like in the world. And so I bought into that. I bought into adopting a lot of the belief systems of my peers around me. And a large part of it was, look, I wanted to survive.
Hmm.
I had been, I had allowed myself to be bullied before in my past, and one thing I was deathly afraid of was I didn't want to be doing a life without sentence and get bullied in prison.
Hmm.
So survive, don't get bullied, and also I wanted to fit in. I
Yeah.
wanted to be perceived as strong enough to sort of hold my own in there, right? I
Right.
was I was really afraid of being perceived as weak. So I was a 19-year-old kid with a bunch of insecurities that knew he was way out of his depth.
Hmm.
But I also knew from my previous criminality that I could I could adopt behaviors and beliefs that were destructive in order to survive. I knew that. I wouldn't have phrased it at that time, but that's exactly what I did. And so I became, in many ways, fraudulent, a chameleon. I would do what I needed to do to fit in. I was violent. I was involved with criminal activities. And I would tell myself all kinds of stories to justify that. And I was very much deceptive towards my family and friends who were supportive of me. And when I would get into trouble, I would say, "Hey, man, I'm just getting through this," and they would believe that. No one really questioned me because they didn't know what I was going through. But could I have done things a lot differently? Perhaps. There were guys that navigated prison much more gracefully than I did,
Hmm.
but I chose what I chose because for me it seemed like the best option at the time. And eventually I had a reckoning with that. I came to a place where I realized I had to make amends and changes for all of the harm that I had done to it, prison community, my outside community, to my friends, my family, the people that I had harmed, and also to myself.
How
And
many
that in
years were
itself was
you
a
into that at that time?
I was at 19 years in when I reached my point where I realized that I call it my rock bottom, my
Hmm.
step one moment, where I realized that all my supposed smarts and wits and everything that I thought I had established in prison up until that time, because at that point I was established, I was much more confident with myself and like the world, how it worked in prison. But I realized that all of it was just empty. And I had a real like uh, reckoning with myself, and I had to get really honest with myself about some things that needed to change, and I had to make some hard decisions. And I began that process of doing so, and started
Was
seeing
it
different
just
results in my
was
life.
it just the moment, Jason, that you just felt like after 19 years you were just totally spent, just that you were empty? Is that what brought you to that rock bottom moment, that I've got to do something different, even though I'm here, I've got to feel different?
Well, I think what happened for me, Brent, was okay at that point in time. There was a lot of things going on around me that I was no longer. So, for instance, the criminality, being involved with politics in prison, smuggling, all the stuff that I was involved with, like my values had shifted.
Mm,
That was no longer working for me, and I was at odds with a lot of it,
mm,
right? And I couldn't justify the things that I once had justified anymore. And I felt really out of place. I felt out of place with my peers. I felt like I had finally proved to everyone that I was as bad as I had projected myself to be, but I
mm.
felt more fraudulent than ever.
That's
And
interesting.
so it just felt like I was like, it wasn't working and something needed to change and I couldn't go on like this. And so when I realized like, hey man, like this isn't going to work. And I was at the point of, I was either going to commit suicide.
Hmm.
I was at like a depth of despair and hopelessness that all of my life had led to nothing but harm and destruction and chaos and lies.
Hmm.
And so I reached this place of hopelessness and despair. And I was like, okay, well, what's it going to be? Am I going to continue doing this? Because I know how this is going to go. I'm just going to continue digging holes for myself and other people. And I just don't want that anymore. Am I going to change? Or am I going to just take myself out of the equation? And before I took myself out of the equation, I said, well, look, let me just try to change.
Mm,
And so what happened was I happened to be reading these like pamphlets from this group called ACCI,
hmm.
American Corrections Community Institute or something like that. And it was on, one of the topics was on scripting. And scripting is the belief patterns that we pick up that impact our worldview
Mm,
and our place in the world.
hmm.
And as I was reading it, as I was, so I'm, at one point I'm in conflict with myself and everything that I've been thinking about my position in the world and in prison specifically. And I'm trying to figure out how I can change that, but I'm at odds with that because I've bought into all these ideas and beliefs and this whole mode of conduct, right? Well, I read this thing on scripting and it says, look, man, a lot of people pick up scripts that they just adopt without ever really critiquing them.
Hmm.
And I thought about it and I was like, wait a second, what if all of my ideas about my place in the world are just scripts?
Mm.
Why can't I just change it? And so I started looking at that. And that was the real beginning of making all the decisions that came after that. And that takes courage.
Well, it does too. I mean, to change on the outside here when you're not in prison takes courage, obviously. But when you're in prison and you've created this world for yourself and how
Mm,
people perceive you, and then you're going to break from that, um, that's something, man. Because you have to find a whole different way of moving in prison, people
yeah.
you move with in prison,
Yes.
and that's something that's kind of hard to explain if you haven't been to prison. But it's very primitive, and I'm talking about it in a much lower level than where you were at. But even at any level, when you're in a place where nobody leaves, the place gets primitive, and so there's people who hang out together and do things together, and you broke away from that and went another way. How was that perceived? How did you move out of that?
So for one, I had to take steps to change who I was associating with. That was one. Then here's the deal though with that environment, you can't just run from problems because you're still there. Wherever you
Yeah,
go, you're there, right?
you're there.
So not
Wherever
only
you
did I
go,
have to
you're there.
change, yeah,
Right.
not only did I have to change who I started hanging around, but I had to start changing how I responded to the environment, how I looked at opportunity. And so what happened was initially when I started making real changes in my life, and I started getting involved with like looking at critiquing my thinking and my approach to the world and prison specifically. Because at that time I wasn't really sure. There was this wish that I could one day go home, but it was really just more like as long as I never come back to being in the place where I am right now, like spiritually, mentally, physically, like I'm good. I just don't want this anymore. Right. I
Okay.
don't want to be involved with anyone getting hurt. I don't want to be involved with smuggling drugs and whatever else we were involved with,
Hmm.
right? I just want to go find something that has real value and meaning that I
Hmm.
can contribute towards. Well, I read this book by Tony Robbins
Love
and
Tony Robbins.
it just shifted my entire idea of what my potential was and what possibility was. And then I happened to land on a yard where there was these guys that were doing this innovative programming for like rehab and self-help.
Mm-hmm.
And there happened to be a captain on that yard who knew me from my younger days. And so when I came on that yard, he said, "Hey, get him involved." And he opened the door for me to get involved with these guys. Well, I had just read this Tony Robbins book, and like I had read like Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of
Mm-hmm.
Highly Effective People. And so my thinking is, okay, everything that I've been doing before, there's some value to it,
Yeah.
but let's take the stuff that's valuable, because not everything I was doing previously was wrong. I knew how to network. I knew how to problem solve. I knew how to like think and adjust and all that stuff.
Adapt.
But now it was, let me take what was good from that,
Mm-hmm.
because not all of it was bad, but
Right.
let me apply it in a new way with what I'm learning.
Mm-hmm.
And I started immediately seeing results, right? And what happened was Tony Robbins has this thing. He says, "Look, man, if you wanna do something in your life, you go find the people that are doing it and bring
Mm-hmm.
them value." Well, these guys that were on this yard, they were doing what I wanted to do. So I just went to them and I was like, "Hey, give me something to do." They gave me a task and I executed quickly and said, "Give me another one." I executed again, right? And all that was just me bringing value to them and establishing credibility and reliability, right? And I realized over time that that's really one of the big keys for success, because a lot of guys, they would come later and they would say, "Hey, give me a chance," to the same guys, but they just wouldn't execute.
Right.
And so I was just like, when you're the one guy who does in the room full of people who don't, it's able to differentiate yourself and to stand out, right?
Right.
And so that's what I did. Meanwhile, I kept continue learning. I invested in my education. I went to college, but I was also studying self-help stuff, and I really started believing in serving the community. One of the things too that I picked up, it sounds corny, but the secret to living is giving. And I would just live in that, and I would go try to bring value to people in the yard. I would try to get them involved with groups. I would try to encourage them to get involved with education. We would try to be a voice that really spoke to what's possible for us and how we can expand our horizons in here, how we can have a different level of value and meaning in here, aside from what we've been accepting for ourselves. Because up until that point, Brent, I realized that I had been accepting a world that was very small,
Mm-hmm.
right? A very narrow scope of the world. Also, what happened was that specific yard, they had a couple of events that I had never experienced before. Um, and one of them was a Defy Ventures event, which is the organization I work for now. They help people learn entrepreneurship skills, develop entrepreneurship mindset, and there's character building, but also business building. Well, they bring people into prisons and they bring volunteers, and you have these workshops and these huge events. Well, for me, being involved with those events was like transporting me for the day from prison.
Mm-hmm.
And that experience was something that I would hold on to when times got difficult. And really, the culmination event, the graduation event, is like a rocket pitch competition where you're like, it's like a Shark Tank
Yeah.
style thing. And I happened to win. I just got lucky. It was my night. I won out of
Well,
my
you
class.
you told me about this when we talked on the phone. Can you share that a little bit? Because
Yeah.
I thought it was
So,
really interesting how that all worked.
so in the culmination event, the graduation of Defy Ventures, you've been building up your business concept all this time, building up a pitch, and you've developed a business model. And these investors and these volunteers are going to come in and they're going to basically judge you against your peers. And you work through a bracket system to get to the final five. And
Which
that's
is
all I
really
was
like
hoping
the
to do.
Shark Tank.
It is like the Shark
Yeah.
Tank. It's cool. They give you feedback and you
Yeah.
get a chance to like step into something that is different than what at least I was accustomed to at the time. And also, like, it's a valuable experience. There's these connecting exercises with the volunteers. You realize how much you have in common with them. They realize how much they have in common with you. And so it's very expansive, right? um, in terms of expanding like your idea
Mm-hmm.
of what the world can be. Well, I made it to the final five and I got to pitch in front of some of my loved ones that came, some of the other families that came for the other guys. I think there were like 40 or 60 of us in that cohort, right, at that time. And then all the volunteers. And I pitched against four of my friends, one of them my best friend. And I happened to win. It was my night. It was great. That experience validated so much of what I had thought I had in me.
Yeah.
And that experience
Really can
was
be tough,
something that
man.
just, I took it like you mentioned earlier, we were talking about small wins, right?
Hmm.
That was a big win for me.
Sure.
And in the time since where there's been hardship and challenge and difficulty, I've often used that as a reference for, hey, look, like, no, this is just a tough time. It's not how it's always going to be, because
Right.
I know I've done this before, right? I can get through this. I can learn this. I can adapt. I can pivot. Um, Beliefs are all about references, right?
So true. And there was a guy that, talking about all these different books. There's one guy that says, you know, we do a really good job of playing the bad movie in our mind. We just
Sure.
plug it in, and what we really should be doing is plugging in that moment that you were proud of, the one that you knew that you conquered and you did well and you made yourself proud. That's the movie you should be playing when you get
Yeah.
into tough times, because you know that you conquered that. You had a whatever. Everybody's got their best moment, but for whatever reason, naturally, I don't know if it's environment or whatever, we plug in the bad movie instead of taking the good movie that gives us confidence, that gives us strength, that gives us the will to fight, all those different things that happen. But I so agree with what you're saying
Yeah.
to that.
So I began to build up a whole new set of references, right? And also I learned so many tools. Like, one is like, when I'm at my worst or most self-absorbed or feeling most insecure, the cure for that is go find someone to help,
Mm,
right? Like they call it, one of the medical mental health terms is extreme self-focus on a continuum. The other side of that continuum to mental health, like that's mental unwellness. Mental wellness is, on the other side of the continuum, is altruism, finding someone else to help, right?
hmm.
And that's not just in like mental health, but also you'll find that in 12-step work,
Sure.
right?
Yep.
It's so, for me, being able to do that and realizing that I had a value to give to people, and in that I had a value to receive from people, has been a cure. It's been medicine, right? And it hasn't been perfect, but I keep setting these points sort of as my aims, and I use these tools as I go, and so it's been successful thus far.
Well, you know, I had a guy on here, Damon West, who he he was sentenced to 55 years. He was burglarizing things. He had gotten addicted to methamphetamine, so the burglaries were feeding his habit. But you sound like the coffee bean of the book that he writes, because
Oh, I
it's
know of him now, the coffee
yeah,
bean guy.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's, you know, it's the egg, the carrot, and you
Yeah.
got to be the change. The coffee bean changes the water.
Hmm.
Otherwise the water changes the carrot, makes it soft. The egg makes it hard. But his whole thing is about being of service, but being the change. And so he was the change, and now he goes out and he talks to everybody. You know, he's gone all through the SEC and
Hmm.
football, and now he's talking to corporate and whatever. But his thing is right on point, Jason, to what you're talking about, is being able to be of service, um, and be the change, and then that gives you this confidence that you can continue to step forward. And you know, that's one of the reasons, you know, that people always, when I first got started, like, why is this called nightmare success? Why do those two words together? I was, when I was walking the fence of Leavenworth, I always thought, you know, what are the two words that don't go together that are always together?
Hmm.
And it's you're walking through your nightmare to get to whatever you perceive as your success. But the nightmare is your fears, your unknowns, uh, those things that scare you, and you know, it makes your stomach kind of, you know, turn. But if you continue to walk through it, you find your success, whatever that is. Everybody has a different definition for their own success, but it's really, I think it's freedom to believe in yourself. And I think somehow, some way, very unbelievably, you did that while you were in, after 19 years, and then you started teaching other people while you were in.
Yeah. Yeah. So absolutely. That process was the process from when I began really taking real steps to change my life to coming home was 9 years. Right. And I learned the entire time. Um, One of the biggest things that I have to say that I learned was prison had always been offering me a form of salvation. There had always been opportunities. I just refused to see them for a long
Mm-hmm.
time because in my mind, like, the world owed me something, and
Yeah.
it should come gift wrapped like a Christmas present.
Right.
Where what I learned by the time I left was, you know, sometimes blessings come in ways that just aren't very comfortable.
Yeah.
And it's up to us to utilize that and live into that and see if we can contain the blessing that's involved, right? Like, can we be the vessel that actually nourishes this thing and stewards it so
And
that
don't
it can be
lose it.
beautiful for me and for other people, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, yeah, I was blessed to stay in the work. I was facilitating a lot of groups. I started developing my own programs, involved with some just amazing things, man. Miracles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And by the time I left, I went through a lot of hardship even once I had turned the page, so to speak. But by the time I left, I was just so touched and grateful to have had the experience that I've had, to have the brotherhood that I had with the men in there that were at, by now, just so many guys really committed to changing their lives, bringing value to the outside world, living amends, and just beautiful people, right? And so for me to go through that process with them,
Yeah.
the struggle, the victory, I just felt really like blessed, enriched, you know?
So you were going through all this, but in the
Mm.
meantime, there was something going on to where things changed to where there was a possibility for you to be able to have the hope that you were getting out. How did that all come about?
So what first had to happen was I had to get commuted from life without parole to a different sentence. And when Jerry Brown was leaving the office in 2018, um, yeah, I think he left in 2018. Uh, the end of it, I put in a commutation, and really it was just a wing and a prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, look, here's the deal. I had done enough things at that point to make a compelling case for myself. Was I
Mm-hmm.
perfect? No. Did I have 19 years of bad road behind me? At this point, when I put in the commutation, I think I had 22, 23 years in. So I
Mm-hmm.
had a good, like chunk of time where like I'd been like significantly devoted, and I had a documentation trail to show, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I had letters from staff and all kinds of support from the outside world, right? And so I put in for the commutation. And I think when we spoke on the phone, I
You
think
told
at
me
the
it's less
time,
than 1% chance, I think, or
right.
something.
So I think it's like when I first decided to change my life, I think I calculated it as like a 1% chance of ever having a real change of fortune and coming home.
Mm-hmm.
Um, with the commutation, when I put it in, I think it was like 7% of commutations at the time, I think were getting uh, either granted or getting the interview,
Okay.
right? Well, then I got the interview. And what the man told me when he came to interview me from the governor's office was that 30% of interviews get granted.
Okay.
So I went from 7% to 30% at that point.
Okay.
And then once I eventually got granted the commutation, uh, the governor commuted me to 30 to life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew that that made me eligible for a new law to immediately go to board.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that time, I guess people that were going to board for their first time, it was like 66%, 68% grant.
Yeah. So
So,
keep it
okay,
moving
so
up.
slowly I'm just sort of playing the numbers here in the back of my mind, right? Um, well, I got denied the first time. And then I waited 18 months or something, 20 months, got denied again.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a really tough denial for me. But I just stayed in the work, man. And even when there was times where
Is it like the movies where you go in, there's a board, got people sitting at the table, you sit down in a chair? Is it like that
I
where
think the
they're
first time
interviewing?
was more like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first time was, but the second time I went was after COVID.
Yeah.
So they do a lot of the board stuff on monitors now.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, and so I had done a lot of work at that point. I felt like I was ready, but they denied me. I wasn't super shocked the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Now the second time I went back, they denied me again, not for anything new, but they denied me for something that I had admitted in my first hearing,
Mm.
and they felt like not enough time had passed. And so at that point, I think this is important. Um, I really was at odds with with that in terms of like my relationship with God specifically. I was like, I can't. I'm fine with God having a plan, but I wish He would let me in on it. because I don't, yeah,
That's
I
great.
can't read the tea
This
leaves
should be a
here,
T-shirt.
right? Yeah. And
I like that, Jason.
most of my peers were
He's
like,
got a
dude, I
plan.
can't,
Just let me in.
yeah,
Let me
yeah.
know about it.
Because if God came down and he told you, you'd be
I
cool with
love
it,
that.
right? But because
Yeah.
you're not getting clarity,
Right.
it was challenging for me. And I had a lot of conversations with my friends, and a lot of them were like, they didn't understand why I'd been denied either. Some of them did, but you know what I was left with, Brent, was I gotta make this have value for me and other people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just took it to the guys. I took it to the groups. I took it to prayer. I took it to meditation. I took it to my journal. I
Mm-hmm.
used all the tools. I just stayed in my rituals and my daily things to continue living into being the man that I wanted to be
Mm.
that could be suitable.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was great because that time gave me more time to refine. It gave me more time to build, uh, build out my coaching stuff that I was using with the guys. It gave me more time to help build programs for people in prison. And yeah, it ultimately now I can say, hey, I made the best of it.
Well, what I
Um,
love about it, though, Jason, is that so many times, and you're a testament to how important hope with action is, because just having hope is nice, but you have to take action. But a lot of people will have hope and they get knocked down, and they're like, well, that didn't work, and they lose hope.
yeah,
And then when they lose hope, that's the worst thing to happen. We walked around with a lot of people in prison that had lost hope, and you could just see it in their eyes. But there was something in you that even though you were getting rejected, you weren't quitting. And I think that's the secret recipe sauce there, is that you don't quit when you get rejected. You get better. You got better
yeah.
every time that you get rejected. And that's something that's a nugget of wisdom there, that anybody who's listening to this goes into 800 prisons. So for those listening, don't lose hope, but you also have to take action. And if you keep stepping, there's a good chance that your percentages, like you're talking about, Jason, your percentages went from 1 to 7 to 30 to 66.
I think that that's a really important point. So there's a couple of things in that, right? Again, it's building the reference model for your beliefs, right? And in knowing you have to step in the faith, right? And you have to take action. We're always planting seeds. We're always creating something. So okay, when I was a kid and I wanted to be a gangster and I was involved with drugs, I was living my life day in and day out a certain way to
Mm-hmm.
where I was creating a high probability that someone was going to get hurt or I was going
Yeah,
to get hurt,
something was going to
right?
happen. It's going to be bad, right?
I don't usually talk about guarantees, but I do believe in probabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Once I started changing my life, I was started eat, sleep, breathe, living my day in and day out, to where now I'm creating new probabilities that
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have freedom of some sort, liberation of some sort, at least mentally, spiritually, right? Um, and creating different like value in relationships. I live that way to bring that fruit, right? We're constantly planting, waiting, or reaping, sometimes both. And so, what you're talking about when guys quit, right? Like, say they don't see the results quick enough.
Yeah.
What I learned about this, and I learned this from my second denial,
Mm-hmm.
I thought that because I had been planting that I was ready to reap at that
Mm-hmm.
point. But what I didn't realize was I wasn't in a reaping phase with the seeds I'd been planting. I was in a waiting phase.
Mm-hmm.
But what I was reaping was the seeds from yesterday still.
Right.
And I needed to get clear on what phase I was in so that I didn't have frustration, so that I could continue to plant the right things. Because had I given up and self-destructed, man, the next harvest, it would have gone to ruin,
That's
right?
profound. That's
So
profound. That's
we
very
got to
true.
constantly realize like we're always creating something. What are we creating? And if
Mm-hmm.
we don't have a clear aim, right? And we're not committed to that aim, then what's going to happen is we can slip into what's called not just a default purpose, but a default future,
Yeah.
right? And that's a scary place to be. I've been there.
Well, and
So yeah.
I ran across that default purpose on your Instagram. You had posted that, and um, that's so true, because if you don't have a purpose and you don't have a plan and you don't have the goals to put action into that plan, then it's a default purpose, and whatever that is happens, and it might not be what you want to have happen. And I think also that's how people get institutionalized we talk about being people getting
Sure.
institutionalized in prison, and it's so easy to do because everything's, counts at the same time. This is the same time. This everything's the same. I sit in this chair the same. But when I got out of prison, I started like looking around me and realizing, no, there's a lot of people that are institutionalized with bad marriage, bad childhood,
Mm-hmm.
bad job, and they won't get out of it because, it's like the guys that are afraid to get out of prison, that it's such an ugly routine. They hate it. They talk about it when they get up, when they go to bed, they hate it, but it's something that gives them comfort because they know it. And that's the one thing that I see with people on the outside is that they hate their job, or they hate this or they hate that, but they won't step out of it because it's become that ugly comfort to them, so that it's more comfortable to stay in something they hate than to step something that scares them, but it's something they want to step forward to. And
There,
I think
that's
that's
yeah.
and I
I
think
think
that's
that's
what you did
absolutely
over
true.
and over.
Yeah, and plus, like, I reached the threshold, right? Like, when I had my breaking moment, one of the things that I've read that I think is really valuable is the pain of staying the same, like the fear of change has to be outweighed by the pain of staying the same, and
Yep.
that's what happened for me. Like, I reached the pain threshold
You mess.
where
Yeah.
I had to take action, man,
Yeah.
because I just couldn't do it anymore. And for some people, they haven't reached that place yet. I hope that they don't ever have to and they can make the changes, but I understand it if they don't. So I think that there's something to what you were just saying right there. Like, we get comfortable in our routines. I think there's a quote, I'm going to paraphrase it. Men will like men will like accept a level of despair and call that happiness,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's kind of what goes on. Like, we'll get familiar with this pain, and we'll sort of make all these rationalizations why we can stay in it, because we're just afraid to take the steps, or
That's
maybe
it.
it's the unknown, like we don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
But I think the hope in that is every day we're given the opportunity to step out into discovery,
Yeah.
right? And we can ask for help. Like,
Right.
people will help us, so
And
yeah.
and I think that's another great nugget of wisdom that you're throwing out there, Jason, is that people will help you. People that, I mean, we have to humble ourselves to ask for help, which is sometimes very hard to do.
Sure.
But for the people who are getting it right, you can look around and say, that guy's getting it right. If I go talk to him and ask him how he's getting it right, there's a good chance he's going to tell me how he's getting it right, because he probably is pretty proud of the fact of how he's getting it right. And then once he shares that with you, he kind of takes you on because he shared something with you of his own thing, and it almost becomes like an automatic mentor. But I always say it's like getting the answers to the
Absolutely.
test before the test, but you have to humble yourself first. Say,
Yeah.
man, I need help. I like what he's, and then I'm going to implement that back into my world.
Absolutely. And I think that one of like one of the things that I would encourage everybody listening to is, hey man, pick 10 people that you want in your network, 10
Yeah.
people that you want to mentor you, that you can learn from. Write them a letter and be really, really sincere, and how you think that, like, how you admire their work, how, and ask them how you can bring value to them. And you'd be
Mm-hmm.
surprised with some of the responses that you'd get, because that's what I have
That's
done and
brilliant.
still do,
It's
and it
brilliant.
works. And
It's
it's not
brilliant.
this is not something that I made up. I just read about this in personal development
But it
books and then tried
works.
it.
But it's
Most of the
worked.
stuff, most of the stuff in personal development books, people never tried the stuff. But if you actually try it, and
Yeah.
don't just do it once and give up, like,
No.
understand that you're building a new skill set and there's going to be a learning curve to it, but eventually you get it, and it's like, bam, now that's 1 win, 2 win, 3 wins, 4 wins. Before you know it, you're standing in a whole different place
Right.
with a whole different level of possibility in front of you. It's
Yeah.
beautiful.
So true. And it's like anything else. I played a lot of sports when I was growing up, and you just don't go out and play the game. You practice,
Sure.
you practice. And then hopefully when you get in the game, you can do what you practice. And that's what life is you got to keep practicing, and, you get into the game and you can perform. So you get to that 66%, Jason, and you finally, make it.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine, like, after that amount of time, what what did you think? Like, I mean,
When
because,
when when
well,
I
like, I
came
mean,
home,
they say, hey, we're going to let you go. I mean, after all this time, I mean, were you like shocked, or were you thinking, yeah, it's time? I mean, how did your mind play that out?
I actually, yeah, I was accepting of it. I was grateful. I was also somewhat like, I want to say I was very even keel. Like I didn't
Okay.
overreact or because I wasn't sure exactly again now what am I stepping into. I
Right.
knew I had an idea. At this point I had enough like um
What did you think
self.
you were stepping into? Because I know a lot of guys, like where I was, 6 months out, guys would get kind of freaky. It's like, oh my gosh, this means that I've really, you kind of get into this thing where you've been, you know, I had a 5-year sentence. You were in for 28 years. So 6 months out, people start, they know what their date is they start getting a little freaky. It's like, I hope I've done enough in here to get ready to be out there. What was your thought about stepping back into the world after 28 years?
So if I remember it correctly, I think that my main approach was I'm going to continue to do the things that have worked. Like in terms of I'm going to continue to use the tools that have gotten me this place. I'm going to continue to have my morning rituals. I'm going to continue to like center myself and have time with myself so that I can continue being the person that I want to be, who I want to show up as. But also, I'm going to leave room for learning, adapting. I know that there's going to be challenges and struggles, and I'm going to try to do my best to like temper that, right?
Yeah.
And I knew too, like uh, there's a lot of people like that are rooting for me to be
Yeah.
successful,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of guys coming behind me that want to come home, and I represent them, and so I want to do the best I can by them.
Right.
And yeah, I mean that was kind of my general thing, but then I also knew like there's stuff I just don't even know. Like I can anticipate and theoretically I might understand something, but I could have never told you what it was like the first time I stepped into a gas station and I saw the immense amount of things that were available.
Yeah.
And it
Sensory
really
overload.
it blew me away. It just blew me away. Like I cannot believe I can purchase any of these things that I want right now because everything else up until then had been very restricted,
Sure.
right? So it was just and I could anticipate that, but
Right.
actually experiencing it was something else. So I had the self awareness to kind of recognize that.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, dude, like some of the things,
I mean, you just walked out a little over a year ago.
yeah, 14, it's been 14 months.
14 months. And the picture that you're of the person you were walking out with, who was that you were walking out
Oh,
with?
that's my fiance.
Okay. So that
Yeah,
had to be fantastic, right?
that was great. That was great. And she's beautiful, man. We've been close our entire lives, just about. Um, and yeah, we're doing well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the other and I know you're doing good things.
Hmm.
You went back. You're with the Defy Ventures. That was part of the thing that really you plugged into while you were in, which I think
Hmm.
is so cool. That now you're with a company that was meant something to you while you were in,
Yeah.
and you're doing things, Jason, that I love. That you had a bucket list either written down or in your mind. And I'm watching and seeing, you jumping out of planes and going down in the ocean. And what's all that been like?
Oh, so that stuff's been amazing and fun. And I share the bucket list because I think it's important that people have dreams and have goals and then execute those things,
Yeah,
right? I think that there's a value to that. And that's the fun stuff that I get to do aside from also the meaningful stuff, right? I think that there's a huge
well, tell us what you're doing now.
okay, so I work with Defy Ventures. I'm a program manager. And so for the incarcerated community that comes home, if they want to build a business out here and get involved with our program, I'm one of the guys that coaches them through that process. We
I
have a
love that.
whole system and a program in place for that. I also co-founded a nonprofit called Reentry Wheels with some friends. We'll be looking for funding soon to get that rolling, where we'll be providing vehicles for people coming home
Well,
that
and I
are,
love that because that was personal to you. You had a
yeah.
car, and you know how much that means,
Oh,
to
it's
have.
it's 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 a game changer. There's a
Yeah,
lot of people that when they come home, they might not have access to personal transportation, and so they miss out on job opportunities, or they miss out on. It just makes their life a lot easier if you have it, right?
yeah,
And so what we want to do is for people that are ready and responsible, we want to provide that access to them, right? Um, and then yeah, so I have a book on Amazon called the Move Your Mountain Program. It's just made of workshops that I created while I was in prison and that we were holding for the guys in prison that I've held for people out here. And
It's
it's
called
just
Move
it's
Your Mountain.
the Move Your Mountain program.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's just an offering for someone if they couldn't come to the workshop but they wanted to do the work, they can get into it. It's not, it's not a bunch of stories. It's just brass tacks. Like let's roll up your sleeves and let's
Yeah.
get to it.
Let's go at it.
Yeah.
Technology wise, what was that like after 28 years?
Actually, technology. Let me see.
Because you
I've
were in the
taken
90s,
Yeah.
basically.
So I've taken to it fairly well. It's pretty amazing. That said, I also realize that I'm constantly in a learning phase with it because it's so fast. And like when you're doing documentation or you're using, uh, different databases that you have to input information into, it's been challenging for me, but I'm really grateful that I've had an opportunity to immerse myself in it because I'm picking it up fairly well.
That's
you know
good. I can't
yeah.
imagine.
And that's an encouragement I want to give to all the guys or women hearing this
Yeah.
is, don't be afraid of technology. Just immerse yourself in it and allow yourself to just experience it. Even the frustrations, like this morning, man, I had a password that was driving me nuts. I can't tell you. That's one of the things they don't tell you is how to take care of all your passwords. And but hey, look, we got to learn. We got to get into it and just evolve and grow.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. That's so cool. Well, I I am absolutely fascinated with your life story because there's so many times and places and things that it could have ended so badly. And
Hmm.
you worked through it, Jason, to the point where I think you are an inspiration to people. And I hope you keep doing the things that you're doing because people like you are the people that can really make real change because you've lived such a, I mean, all the way in, all the way down to the rock bottom, and you worked your way back, and now you're at a point where you're helping people get back on their feet, and it's got to feel good. I mean, it's got to feel like you've put in a lot of work, but the giving back part has got to really feel good to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's what gives me meaning and purpose in life. I realized that, like, for me, I have to have meaning because I could be surrounded by wealth and all these like
Yeah,
opulent things, but it's if it doesn't have meaning, then it's just going to
that's
be empty
empty.
for me,
It's
right?
empty, and
And so I
I
got to
I
have that. Yeah.
I think that is something that might be a common denominator going to prison, and that is you actually have a different perspective on when you get out. You really want to focus on things that have meaning. You want to be doing something that you have a passion about because you feel like you had time taken away, and you had a lot of time taken away. um, I felt like I was jumping in a moving car after 3 years, so I can't even speak to what you must feel like that. But I think there's a common denominator of, you know, I think this is the 147th interview I've done. This is actually the end. This is the interview that ends season 3. So
Hmm.
we'll start season 4 next week. But the
Congratulations.
the thing that I think is that the reason why I think of all these interviews, these people come out and they think, man, I've got so much time left, and I'm grateful that I have this, but I want to find what what's meaningful. And that's a narrative that people don't really know because they think that people who go to prison are lost forever and they're ex-felons forever, which that we are, but we're not lost forever. We do find our passions. We do find things that we find that we want to have meaning in. And I also think that one thing I hope I don't lose is, I just got back from my youngest daughter getting married. And, one of the things that I was thinking was when I was walking down that aisle is thank God I'm here. Thank God I'm
Hmm.
here and I'm not
Yeah,
in prison. And the moment, that is, we we have these moments that I think some people take for granted, but we have moments that you got to just stop and think, man, okay, this is good. This is good. This is a lot better
for
than
sure.
that other place. But I think you've done so well with that, Jason, and you've done it so quickly because a lot of guys have a really, really hard time getting out. Reentry is hard. Reentries, but I think that you had planned so well in your mind and what you're doing with your programming and everything that you were doing. You just stepped into it and it maybe felt more familiar to you than somebody who hadn't planned. And that's one of the things that, as people are listening to this that are in the prisons, man, don't waste your time while you're in, because it's going to be hard when you get out. So make sure that you don't waste the time when you're in, so that you can get out and you have a plan. And I think that's one of the things. You've only been out 14 months, and I think you've stepped into society in a way that it's the way you want to step back
Yeah,
in.
I hope so. I think so, and I hope I continue to do that. I think that one of the two things, I never look at it like I lost time. I look at it
Yeah,
like I spent my time,
you
and I
earned it.
got I got from it what I got from it, right?
Hmm.
Um, and I have value in that to give to others, to share with others,
That's a
right?
big statement too, that
So
you feel like you didn't lose time, because how
yeah,
old are you now? You're
I'm 47.
47. Yeah.
Yeah,
You
I
said you're
never,
younger.
I almost never tell myself that story, right? I always look at it like I spent my time and I got value from that, and
Yeah.
I have value to give.
It's a great way to look at
Secondly,
it.
I never look at it like I did this all myself.
Yeah.
I put in work, but I was also surrounded by beautiful people. I think that there was a higher power involved. Like I was blessed. There was opportunities that came my way. Just all kinds of things. That
Was it hard to
it
leave
was.
those guys being
What's that?
basic? Was it hard to leave those guys being there as long as you were? That really, some of those guys become family to you.
Yeah, absolutely difficult. But also, I want to set the table for them when they come home, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going to stay in contact with them and just be a source of encouragement for them until they do,
Yeah.
right? And that's part of my mission. Um, and so again, like I think that no person does this alone. You got to
Yeah.
realize, like you have a community that's available for you, and even if you feel isolated, let's really look at that. What's the script involved? And then how can you connect to others? How can you bring value to them? Who can you help solve a problem? And even if it's only one person, one can lead to two, can lead to four, can lead to eight, right? And before you know it, again, you're standing in a completely different place
Hmm.
with a completely different relationship to the world, other people, and yourself. But
Yep.
it starts with us, like, just taking an accounting and saying, hey, I'm going to take the next step forward. That's the best I got,
Well,
you know?
Tony Robbins needs you on stage, Jason.
He does.
That's what's his next deal. He needs Jason Holland on stage. Well, after all this stuff that you've been through, Jason, what do you think's your biggest takeaway through the whole thing?
Ooh, gosh. Yeah, I think my biggest one, I'll say one of them, the one that comes to mind. Um, we are constantly being afforded an opportunity, and we have a choice with how we choose to utilize that.
Mm.
Prison was always offering me something. My childhood, my past was always offering me something. There was gold there if I was willing to look and refine it. At this point where I am now, I realize that. And so every day, every moment, I'm given an opportunity to use something to enrich the lives of others and thus myself.
Mm.
What that requires awareness, that requires creativity, that requires patience and humility, right? It requires all these character traits that I need to have and I need to employ in order to make the most of the moment that's
Yeah.
being afforded to me. And so I think we are never at a loss for opportunity, no matter where you are. And but you have to choose to see that and then do the work to sort of make it so. And sometimes that feels like you're just trudging a lonely path.
Hmm.
But there's options. There's options to that.
Always
So
options.
that's one of my biggest
I
takeaways.
I think that's an awesome takeaway. Awesome takeaway. And tell us again the Amazon, how we find that on Amazon. What's the name of that again?
Yeah, it's the Move Your Mountain program by Jason S. Holland, and it's just on Amazon. You know,
Awesome. And
yeah.
folks out there, don't forget to follow, subscribe, share, like, comment. That's all good stuff. I love it when you guys do that. Talking about being grateful, Homestead Financial lets me use this studio here and the fancy lights and the cameras and that. So if you've got any home mortgage needs, Greg Afdiev is definitely your guy. He knows it backwards and forwards. I've got a book out there, Nightmare Success. Check it out. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. Leave a review on Apple if you got time. Those are great. I've got a new website out there, brentcassidy.com. It's with a TY, not a DY. I spell it wrong. As I used to say when I was writing my emails back and forth from Leavenworth, stay strong. I'll do the same. Jason Holland, man, keep doing what you're doing. You
You
are an
too, Brent.
inspiration to
Thank
all
you.
of us.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you having me, and good luck to everyone listening to this. Stay focused, guys.
Nightmare success in and out.